My name is David Hendry. I'm one of the steering committee members of the Vancouver Tenants Union. I've been involved in we call it the outreach and advocacy team of the Tenants Union, and that's basically where the advocacy part of it is. We do have some people who are law students and lawyers who help us with tenancy cases, but the real focus is on organizing. And we are basically trying to, over the last year or more, I guess, is train people in tenant organizing. And yeah, we take a lot from different kind of schools. Jane McAlevey is a person that I look at a lot in terms of her analysis of organizing and building power. It's mostly, she's talking about worker power, but I think a lot of that translates over to tenants. And so a lot of the tools and the techniques that we're trying to learn and trying to implement are based on some of her thinking, and also other like labor unions and how they organize. We've been learning how to try to stop rent evictions in the last couple of years, like mass evictions. When this happens, so this is basically when a renovation displaces a whole building of people. So what we've done is learned how to identify those buildings, and then how to go in and try to organize the tenants to stop that from happening. And we've had some good successes with that too. So that's kind of the backdrop in terms of what we do. And then, yeah, and then it's been a change of pace, I guess, with the COVID-19 pandemic. So with this situation, I think, a lot of people kind of know what's happening in terms of this, but so many people losing their jobs, so many people losing income. There's currently an evictions moratorium that was put in place at the beginning of the month, essentially, meaning that currently if people can't pay or don't pay, they are not able to be evicted at this time until the evictions moratorium is lifted, which we really don't know when that might be. It could be June, could be July, could be August, we don't know. The real problem with that is that any rent debts that are incurred are going to be actionable when the moratorium lifts. So if you've lost your job, you don't have income, you're momentarily okay, but the province has decided that once that's lifted, you can be evicted for non-payment. So there's a real big concern about what will happen to those people, and we think that it's going to be in the thousands. What are the political solutions to that? How can we help to organize people in their buildings to try to mitigate that? So that's the big question right now. And basically what we did around the beginning of the month was create a program, kind of like an overarching campaign, which for the very first thing was just to tell people to stay in their apartments. And we do know of people that decided because they couldn't pay, they would just pick up and go, and that's the last thing that needs to happen in this, So that was our first kind of part of our campaign, was just stay. Even if you can't pay, don't go anywhere, stay safe. Don't drain your bank account to pay the rent if you're going to starve your kids. Those are things that people actually need to hear, So that was the beginning of our campaign.
I was going to ask, just have there been discussions within the VTU about what the long-term plan for supporting tenants are? Because you mentioned all the debt, gets incurred as soon as the moratorium could lift it, which is an arbitrary period of time. And is that questions go through my mind? Is that kicking through? Does it come with interest? If not, how quickly you have to pay it?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, I've been reading articles about landlord message boards and things, and like landlords are really, really unhappy about the eviction freeze, and they're looking for loopholes and wanting to find excuses to get around.
That already Landlord BC, which is the Association of Landlords, they've already anticipated this and have already stated in their communications that it's going to take a government bailout at the end of the emergency period, and that it should be paid through general taxation, right? So they're already anticipating that. They know that it's impossible. It's an untenable situation to evict thousands and thousands of tenants. So the solutions that are lying around will be picked up, and it's important that tenants also have solutions to that problem, which, I think like it has to incorporate some kind of wealth tax. It has to incorporate some kind of, paying only a percentage of the debts to landlords. Like, landlords have to take a hit on this. It can't be borne on the backs of just general taxpayers, and it can't be borne just on the backs of low-income tenants. So yeah, there's definitely people that are thinking about it, and we're thinking about it a lot.
Hey, it sounds like, I mean, we're going through multiple crises, right? We were having a conversation with a friend of ours who's a CA, and we were talking about tenant rights and whatnot. And he mentioned that, there is an overdose crisis as well. I would argue that there's an homelessness crisis. I would argue that once this is all over, we're going to have a massive economic crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen, since the Great Depression, I would argue. And I don't know if it'll be just the homeowners, the landlords. I mean, this is a kind of a plea to the government, anybody watching, that maybe it's time for us to nationalize some of the big five and write down these bad loans that we're not going to be able to pay back. And the moment is now to do it. And I mean, it maybe is a silver lining in this horrible of a situation, that we might actually get some progressive taxation policies at the end of the day. Like you mentioned, David, a wealth tax. We've been begging for it for years, and it's something that is attainable. It is something that has been needed for quite some time.
Taylor, yeah.
You've talked about economic crisis when this is over in the future tense, and I just want to point out that really we're in the economic crisis now, even though nobody in power is really paying attention. I mean, the city of Vancouver may be going bankrupt. The Vancouver Aquarium is saying that it may close its doors permanently. The Storm Crow has gone under now. All the small businesses are starting to go, and it's like, I was going to say, let's not think about that in terms of when the pandemic ends. We need to have been doing all those things you said yesterday. Like,
there's going to be an echo. It's going to be an economic. There's going to be a lot of there's going to be the pandemic forever long, and then afterwards, all this business stuff, social upheaval. Like, what kinds of protests are there going to be in the streets? I mean, I know so many environmental. The climate justice movement is like, okay, so look what they're doing versus COVID-19 as a global catastrophe. What have we been saying for years needs to happen? I know there's going to be a lot more climate strikes as soon as this ends. There's a lot of people, public housing, so many different movements, issues are going to be economic issues, economic movements, social movements, politics. Everything is going to be, after this is over.
Hey, I just want to clarify one thing. I just want to clarify one thing for Taylor. Taylor, it's only one of the locations so far that they've announced as closing permanently, not the other two. And fingers crossed the other two survive.
They know
in regards to Storm Crow.
Some real panic there.
I mentioned that largely just because of the impact that mention will have. Just, and the fact that they closed one is a bad sign. And it's not just, I guess, bunches of small businesses are vanishing. It's pretty much the small businesses in general are going to start shutting down permanently en masse within the next couple of months if nothing is done to prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, I think, I mean, there's lots of interesting things, but one of the things is that, like we're really trying, and I think it's going to take, it's bigger than just us, but we really want to encourage people to punch up and not punch down, and like when, because there is the narrative of, the evil landlord, and they're always terrible, and there's lots of bad landlords, it's true. However, there's like, I'm thinking about all of our, there's a ton of union workers and other folks that make just enough money to get a mortgage, and maybe the only way that they can make that happen is that they have a tenant in their basement. Like tons and tons of people are in that situation, and those are working class people in the broad scheme of things. They they are they are still often, in a societal sense, like on our side. Like a lot of Unite Here 40 workers, lots of women of color, lots of immigrants are also homeowners. So I think what we're trying to say is, yes, your tenant can't pay. Okay. Do you need to threaten them and cajole them and make their lives harder? Or do you need to start talking to your MP and start talking to start calling for regional banks to cancel mortgages and not just defer them,
Yeah,
and
because
so,
deference. I was just gonna say that the deference will only put them into further debt, right? Like, I mean, we've already have news coming out that some banks are going to charge interest on top of the interest that that they're going to keep charging while they're deferring payments. And I mean, essentially, the way it's working out is that you defer your payment now, you're still incurring interest, and then once the emergency is lifted and you have to start paying back, the amount that you would have paid is now back on there with interest, and they're charging the interest on top of all that. So my parents, like immigrant parents, sold everything, came to Canada to give their kids a life, may end up on the streets. And
right.
like you said, we've also had these conversations in the past. It is a matter of punching up, and I think David, you're absolutely correct. I think VTU is absolutely correct when they speak with these homeowners and say to them, hey, look, you can work with your tenant and work together to put pressure on not just the federal and provincial governments, but on these private lenders who
Mhm.
are going to squeeze every penny out of us. And you can't get blood out of stone. It's as
Exactly.
simple as
and
that.
Yeah,
and they're
'cause-
expecting to make profit out of the crisis, essentially. So anecdotally, like what we're doing is, so all of these, we've had about 50 people who, through our website, and maybe now is my time to plug it, bcrentcrisis.ca. So that is where all of our campaign materials are, and there's also a form where people who are interested in organizing their buildings can fill it out, and that lets us know that we can contact them. So all different kinds of people, people who live in buildings with 200 units, people who live in basement suites. It's kind of the whole gamut. And what we've actually found is that, of course, it's not the corporate landlords who are the ones most able to make concessions and give rent relief, are not the ones that are doing it. It's the small, single family homeowners who have somebody in their basement who they've known for 5-10 years, and they say, yeah, we can help you out. We know that you lost your job. We can we've had a couple people who've gotten like 30 or 50% off of their rents, um, and they're the ones that are willing to do that, and it's the big corporate landlords that are not.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, like Landlord BC is an organization. I don't know tons about them. I know that there's like Fairbnb, which is a collaboration across the country, and it's association, that is against at least Airbnb swallowing up the rest of the housing. And that's a coalition of both which Landlord BC and the VTU are a part. So clearly, there are some landlords who understand what you're talking about, but then yeah, I've seen too, like these articles about, these landlords who conspire against their tenant. And, it's happening locally. I don't know where else it's happening. I assume it's happening a lot of places, maybe not everywhere, but there's just looking for any excuse to evict people right now, which I don't understand why everyone does this. Because it's like, it's not just a matter about that tenant, it's about society. Because if more people are wandering outside with nowhere to go, the further COVID-19 spreads. And then there's these like, corporate landlords that are faceless and, don't have a human connection to any individual tenant. Yeah, Tats.
Thank you for bringing that up. Like folks who may get evicted. I mean, we know we have a moratorium on evictions right now, and some people just don't realize it, and they may end up like being actually evicted. Those are going to be maybe far and few between cases, but may happen. But at the end of the day, there are people right now that are homeless that we could be housing. We've had some folks that have been housed, but I think majority of them have not been, right? So like, what's going to happen to them? If there's more people on the streets and they're not able to actually physically distance themselves from then this is only going to get worse, right? And I'm really concerned about an outbreak on the downtown east side and all these places where folks don't have anywhere to go and be safe.
Yeah, for sure. And people that we work with and talk to a lot are working really hard, like doing a gargantuan task of trying to protect people in those situations. So the group SROC, the SROC or SRO Collaborative, they're organizing tenants in about 100 different SROs in the downtown east side.
Right now.
Well, they've been for the last couple of years training peers to do harm reduction, to use Narcan, and to save people's lives. And then this happens. So they're getting all kinds of supplies and soap and everything to try to get people to be able to safely isolate within the SROs. But of course, that's really difficult. Lack of water, lack of sanitation, lack of, so they were trying to get ahead of the game to try to protect everybody as best they can. But something like that really needs a lot of resources to be able to protect everybody. I don't know what the city of Vancouver is waiting on. Like other cities have opened up all of these empty hotels and they've just housed people, and that has not happened. So I know that Gene Swanson and other politicians have been, working hard trying to make that happen. I don't know. I don't know about that piece of it, but obviously there's a lot of resistance to housing homeless people, and it's really sad, and it could be really tragic.
I just want to say, if Jean, you're watching, Ms. Swanson, like if you're watching or somebody watching this can get it to her, please, we would love to have a conversation with Jean Swanson. And I can promise you, if Jean was on this, I would literally just shut my mouth and just listen to her talk the whole time.
That's what I try to do. Yeah. What our strategy has been so far in terms of organizing buildings is, we've really seen that what tenants and what people really need to feel is that they have somebody who has their back. And I'm not talking about me or like the VTU, I'm talking about other people in their building. And we've seen when there's like big renoviction fights, people come together like their family. It's wild. We saw people that didn't talk to each other for 10 years, and then their homes are threatened and they start having meetings and they start fighting back. And it's like they've known each other for 20 years. So sometimes in a crisis, stuff like that can happen. And what we're saying is that, getting over all of if people are suffering, if people are not being able to pay the rent, if they're not able to get food, like all of those basic things, what's actually normal is for you to reach out to people that are in the same situation and try to support one another. It's not normal, but because we live under capitalism, it's normal here to not say anything and be quiet and be more concerned about talking to other people than it is to, to suffer. So we're saying, we don't want you to suffer. We want you to reach out. We want you to build power by organizing in your buildings and use that power to negotiate with your landlord. If that doesn't work, then what do you do next, right? So, and we're talking to people about tactics. We're talking to people about like what it actually takes to get to the point of striking a building. Because if you can't get people to sign their names to a piece of paper and give it to their landlord, you're not going to get them to strike a building. So what we've done is try to figure out a way to do this that's basically contactless and organized in buildings. And it's challenging because what actually works is face-to-face organizing. That's you really, so what a big difference between organizing and mobilizing for myself anyway. Mobilizing is getting the people that already agree with you to do something, right? It's getting, and mostly those are activists for the most part, right? There's only so many of those. But the beauty of organizing in buildings is that the majority of people there are not politically active. They don't agree with you, on all of your political ideas, for sure. But they have an interest in keeping their rent low and keeping a roof over their head. And so we think it's really important that people are building bases like that, and we're reaching new people, and you'll find people who are real leaders too. They're not activists, but they're leaders. They have influence over people, and they can bring a lot of people with them. And that's what we find in buildings too. So that's kind of that's overall like how we would organize the building. Now what we have to do though, we're not passing notes under doors. We used to meet in laundry rooms and lobbies and public libraries. We can't do any of that face to face now. So what we're doing is we're getting people to create a Gmail account that's a generic thing. We're putting it on one of our posters, and we're getting people to door knock and just say, hey, don't open your door. I'm one of your neighbors. We're really concerned about, people being able to pay the rent. A lot of people have lost their jobs. I've got some information for you. When you get a chance, can you come out, take your phone, take a picture, and we can start talking online. And so we're creating email lists basically within buildings so that people can start having conversations, and they don't ever have to, worry about, passing materials or being face to face. And actually, like, one of our organizers is probably on 20 different email lists for 20 different buildings, and there's conversations happening all the time. So it's actually a pretty cool way of doing it. It's not perfect, but so that's kind of how conversations happen. And then we're also doing things like using building surveys, using Google Forms. So we can ask, like, we can put out a survey to everybody in the building and say, how worried are you about paying your rent on May 1st? Did you lose your job? How much, those kinds of questions. Are you willing to do X, Y, Z? And then you get a temperature for the building and see, like, is my idea of a rent strike crazy in this context? Like, nobody lost their job. Are they going to want to do a rent strike? Mm-hmm. Maybe, but probably not. So it helps to be able to get a sense of where that building is going, and also what are the things that people care enough about to start to do something.
So here's my question though.
Mhm.
In certain places, in certain buildings, in certain neighborhoods, you may have folks that are probably not as tech savvy, may not even have a way to like really access emails or understand how to use it. Are folks, and I would imagine so, but are there like leaders, quote unquote leaders, who are willing to or able to like give their phone number so they can like communicate through phone? And I would imagine like people are keeping a physical list as well as a digital one. So I wonder if that's some of the work that's going on to like make sure that the needs of folks that can't meet us on the level that we're organizing at are also able to access it.
Totally, yeah, and that's a really important part. We don't want, half of the building who doesn't have internet access, and there are buildings like that, to not have any say in terms of the direction of the building and decisions that are being made. So for sure, it's more of a challenge, but yeah, we're asking people to, if they don't have internet access, to try to get phone numbers, or even, it's more time consuming, but even try to have conversations through a closed door, to even just get a sense of where people are at. But yeah, those are some of the barriers. And of course, translation is another, and interpretation is another thing for us to think about. And can be challenging, but often within a building, there might be people who are able and willing to also do some of that interpretation. So, yeah. But, like, actually still the most important thing is developing trust between people. If you just, we've seen this already, if you just, put up a poster in the lobby and expect that that's enough, it's not going to happen. Like, people are like, okay, whatever. If you go and you knock on a door and you say why you're there, and you say that you're concerned, and people listen to your voice, and they see that you're acting in good faith, that's really the only way that you can kind of like get through and convince somebody that what their actions are actually going to be worthwhile, and it's not a waste of their time. So, yeah.
I just want to put another disclaimer out. We've done this, I think, on all the videos that we've done regarding organizing in a pandemic. And this is very counterproductive to organizing. When we say knock on their door, we mean that, you knock on the door and speak through the door, not face to face, because we're trying to not spread those germs. We're trying to spread the goodwill and the mutual aid around.
Correct.
So I just want to put this out there. If you're watching this, do not try to get too close. Keep that 2 meter distance, which is roughly about 6 feet, a bit more. Err on the side of caution, and maybe stay like 7 feet away. I don't know how to measure things though that well. So.
And the science keeps on changing, so we're trying to be as cautious as possible,
It's interesting how many rules kind of that we have internalized on how to do things have now just sort of been upended, and we have to just recalibrate what we think of as polite or effective or social even. Like, once upon a time, knocking on a door and then, like, brought gift to my neighbor from my mum the other day, knock on the front door and run back down to the sidewalk and look up in the window to see when they appear. Once upon a time, that would be strange and antisocial. Now that's, like, polite. And it's really weird to just recalibrate how we think about that and to bring it back to the point, especially in terms of organizing, which is very much based on like social custom and instinct. You kind of have to navigate through all this weirdness and still find a point where people are able to connect over time.
So how are we gonna deal with Halloween? Like, I mean, I don't know how long this is gonna go for, but like I feel like I would still like to go, candy door knocking, but like,
I don't know.
See how
Be
Halloween
distributing
goes.
candy via mail. The government is going to subsidize candy Because there's going to be Nestle. It's like, hey man, we'd love to make all this chocolate for free, but we, can't for some reason. Nestle would be like, but we'll mail everyone chocolate if the government covers.
You just take a picture of the chocolate, and that's
My solution, don't give out candy, give out hand sanitizer and toilet paper.
it's like
That actually
thirsty,
sounds like a good plan. All right.
Hey,
so-
David, I do want to make sure that we are not keeping you for too long.
no,
I just want to make sure that we cover the important basis tonight. So please, if you feel comfortable, like maybe speaking about things that you think that we should definitely know about, folks watching this should know about,
Sure.
that we may not have covered just yet.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I do think is important is we're trying to kind of create a strategy that has kind of like a ground game and an online game, you could say. So our ground game is organizing in buildings and trying to build a base that way. And it's important not just for during the crisis, but afterwards too. Because it's at some point it's going to end, and tenants are still going to be having problems. So we want those structures to continue, right? The other thing that we're doing though is that, of course, we know that right. And actually, sorry, you guys were talking about MLAs hearing from from landlords, and that there's a huge push now from landlords trying to make exemptions to the moratorium, to the eviction moratorium. And they're very vocal. They have a lot of political clout, and tenants can't just sit at home and not be talking to their politicians and not be shouting when they're suffering. But that's kind of what's happening right now. So what we're trying to do is not just organize in buildings, but also create conduits for tenants, regardless of where they are, to be able to share their stories. That's really important. Like if people are suffering, they need to say something. But they also need to be connected and call their MLAs.
I think one thing that's kind of important in dealing with this is proving what you're saying about local MLAs. Is kind of a shift in attitudes, because we're talking about like local MLAs and politicians and organizing on a building scale, and that's how we kind of get things done. When I find just listening to chatter on social media and the news and how people are talking about how they think things get done, you hear about Ottawa and Trudeau, and at local most like Victoria, but like that's kind of the wrong priorities when we're talking about dealing with this crisis. And I think we really need to put in a lot of effort to kind of redirect people's like focus away from like these kind of elsewheres and these people who are dealing really with other levels of the crisis in faraway places, and deal with just your building, your community, your local representatives who actually do have some kind of power to get things moving. Because that'll happen much faster if people actually are aware they can make things happen on that scale.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. And the landlords know this, they know how to play that game. They're burning up the MLA's phone lines right now.
Certainly, that is one thing to keep in mind. Yeah, people can't sit at home and not call their politicians. They need to sit at home and call their politicians a lot, your MLA.
I mean, what else do you have to do?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can also send them emails. You can send them text messages. You can get a ham radio and send to Morse code to your MLA. Save us now. I don't know.
SOSs to our MLAs. Yeah, actually, that's really true, though, that landlords and homeowners, they are far more organized in the sense that they have resources, and that they have, and not all of them, but arguably most of them have the money to be able to pursue lobbying powers that much more, efficiently than tenants do. And I mean, it's no surprise to anyone that, a lot of these individuals donate money to political campaigns and political parties, and a lot of the folks that are tenants are not in the capacity to be able to do that. The added challenge I see is that a lot of tenants that live in basements, their doors don't even get knocked on, like during campaigns, during the election cycles. We miss them. I've been outdoor knocking and I've been canvassing, there's many times that those folks aren't even home because they're working 2 jobs and now they're working no jobs, and now we can't go door knocking and knock on their door to begin with, right? So it's a bit of an added challenge. So I'm glad that there is this digital strategy to let folks be able to lobby their representatives on a local level, because Taylor, you're absolutely correct. Housing is a provincial jurisdiction. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and it's not necessarily always strictly a provincial jurisdiction. The federal government does have its hand in housing programs and projects. It's just receded itself for many decades now to a very small level. And maybe that is what's needed. I would argue that maybe now is not the time to be lobbying the federal government for housing concerns. But moving forward, I think we should definitely put pressure on the federal government to get back into the business of housing, to start building social housing again, and help provinces do that.
I was going to say, when you said that the federal government should maybe get back in the business of housing and tenancy and social housing, such and such, that was terribly worded. But I wanted to call back kind of what I said in a previous video. Like, it's weird to me that, for example, that we don't have even tenant rights across Canada. Like in Quebec, there's much more robust tenant rights, and in BC, like in Quebec, the price of the rent is tied to the unit, not the individual. That's something we're calling for here. Why does that exist there, not here? We're the same country. It's more, I've seen people in Montreal fight rent evictions and win. I never heard of that happening in BC. It probably has, but like, I know it's much harder to do. It seems like something that really there should be across the board Bill of Tenants' Rights in Canada. It's a fundamental right, and it's odd to me that it could possibly be so uneven. And this pandemic situation kind of brings home how bizarre and dysfunctional kind of is that we can have uneven basic rights across a single country.
Right. Just a little thing. One of the things is actually the right of to be treated as a union, actually. So within Ontario, I believe there's actual law within the Residential Tenancy Act or whatever, that so that it's able to stop people from being evicted if they say that they have it stops retribution, basically, for organizing. And that's something that we don't have here, and I don't think is in very many other places. So that's another example. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like what it reminds me, because we were talking with my fellow worker Kyle from the Industrial Workers of the World a while ago, and he was saying too, like the BC labor laws, they don't really offer protections for like striking, like they're just mixed up. So if you want to like organize new workplaces, start new unions, it's like no, like you got to either be in like a government or a business union, and they pretty much, like, the bosses dictate often how those things go, or you're hooped. So it's like, I was going to ask Taylor, like, are you telling me that the working class of Quebec is more organized than the working class of Anglo-Canada? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, and like same things like tuition. People go on about, why do students in Quebec, why are people protesting so much in Quebec? They have the lowest tuition in Canada. What do they have to protest about? It's like, why do you think they have the lowest tuition in Canada? I wonder how that happened. Why do they have the best protections and the highest wages Gee, I wonder why they're protesting so much. It's
the
like
history
I
of
wonder, I wonder if there was a relation between these two things happening.
And, you know, like, one of the things that I was really dumbfounded by was how long it took the BC government to declare an eviction moratorium, and how close to the cuff they went. Like, we were not certain that it was going to happen, even though it had been already implemented in more than 20 major North American cities for like the past 2 weeks. And yes, it was implemented in Ontario before it was implemented in BC. So yeah,
And like, not to go on about like the rental supplement, but I must say that after, so we just did this video about tenant rights, and like when we did it was March 28th, but like it's April 15th today, and we're just about to release it. And it's really frustrating that when I had to go back and like add information into the video, the information that I was adding was no better than what we were talking about before, right? Like, we were complaining about like, oh, it's up to 500. We weren't clear on what it was, and now we are. It's $300 unless you have dependents, right? Like, and even if you do have dependents, you have to make sure that your landlord also does their part on it, because it's a two-parter. You started as a tenant, landlord finishes it, and guess what? If you're in an illegal suite, oh goodness, yeah, good luck getting your landlord to fill it out, because when they do, that information will be on the record, and then they might be in trouble, and you as a tenant may actually be also in trouble and at risk of having been evicted after all this is over because you're in an illegal suite. So there's a lot of gaps.
They're saying that BC Housing will not share that information with municipalities. Now, who knows, right? Like, we don't, that's what they're saying. And they're saying that if your landlord is not cooperating with you, contact us and we'll kind of make it happen. But, you know, like, those are aspects of policy that should be kind of figured out before you unroll something. So, like, when I look at the chats on Facebook and stuff like that, there's a lot of people that are just like, yeah, it's not going to work, so I'm not going to do it. There's too many complications, you know, or so. Yeah, it's frustrating that's the progressive solution apparently that was rolled out. And you know, like, all I can say, and particularly about the moratorium, the fact that they took so long, and the fact that there's now tons of pressure, is that, like, real estate and land values and developers are the power block in BC, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, we talk about how like the small landlords are afraid of the big landlords, or sometimes they undermine them. We're talking about, you know, we're talking in BC, like, there is like everything up from small businesses up to, you know, medium-sized businesses. They can get quite sizable before, you know, a business in British Columbia owns the land itself, as opposed to, you know, renting land. So that's all just real estate, and it's also the concentration of ownership of real estate in general in small hands. We don't even know whose hands they are, but there's just a small number of people sometimes.
And like, you know, if that is the real political power block that is putting pressure on the current government, you know. So I think that's the only thing that makes sense in terms of why it took so long for the eviction moratorium to take place. You know, that's the only thing that makes sense, is that there's big players that are pushing on the NDP, and we have to create our own associations and organizations to have any chance of pushing back against that.
All right. And yeah, has the VTU also been growing during the pandemic, or?
Growing? Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, because everybody is sitting at home and, you know, has a lot of time on their hands, we had a bunch of people who, we did this thing around the end of April where we through social media, we asked people to sign a petition saying that they couldn't afford to pay rent. for April. And there was it ended up being close to about 2,000 people that said that. And a lot of those people got in touch with us, and a lot of them signed up to do media, like as tenants, saying, this is my story, and I'm willing to talk to media about it. So a lot of those people got involved, and then a lot of the people that are now organizing their buildings are involved. So yeah, we've definitely seen a big kind of upsurge. But I think one thing that I think we should be doing, which we haven't yet, and I think we will soon, is I know for other groups, when they do like big town hall kind of online town hall events, the numbers on those are just like huge, because everybody or most people are at home and looking for ways to get involved. So a union that I know of had like 3 times the attendance that they normally would at their normal meetings. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can get our stuff together and do that really soon, and particularly around like just there's so many questions, there's so much confusion, right, about the rental subsidy and about what happens with evictions and what's going to happen with rent debt. So I think we need to do that like educational piece also about renters' rights under COVID-19. And yeah, I'm hoping that, I think we're supposed to have a general meeting on next weekend, actually. That's mostly for members, but we're going to try to do like a one that's more open for the public as well.
I was just going to say, I work for a company that produces telephone town halls and whatnot, and I could tell you right now that you're absolutely right. A lot of unions, a lot of organizations, a lot of folks that are doing these town halls are seeing an upsurge in attendance. And I think part of the, like you said, part of the reason is because people are home. But the fact of the matter is that we could have always been doing these sort of town halls and informational sessions virtually. And like tools exist. Obviously, like the company that I work for, the production of it all and management of it all is a bit more expensive than you could just with the Zoom call, right? Like if you pay for like a business account or whatever is Zoom, I think you could do like large ones. But ultimately, I think people are realizing a lot of the things that we had to go through all these hoops to like make happen could actually be done and from home, and we can meet people where they're at, and not just like physically at home or whatnot, but like in their situations,
Totally.
So it's definitely doable, and I'm really excited. And I think I haven't been a part or member of VTU, but I think membership is like what, $1?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like quite accessible. If you're watching this and you are interested in Vancouver Tenants Union, you can join, you can become a member. It's very accessible in many cases. You're paying up to $1 a month or maybe $2. And it's a good place to collect a lot of resources and information is power. So if you get that opportunity, please look Vancouver Tenants Union up. I will include those in the show notes. We'll also include a link to the membership form and whatnot if we can figure that out. But yeah, I think it'd be like very beneficial for folks just to have like that group that they can communicate with, right? Because regardless of where you're living, the information that's coming out of VTU is going to be relevant to you in one way or another. And maybe it'll give you ideas of how to organize for yourself, and maybe you start your own tenants union. But that's a different fight, I suppose.
I'm sorry, Taz, but as a VTU member, I got to say you are not plugging this hard enough. So first of all, yeah, like lots of people who donate, or give higher dues to the union, they save it up for a period of time to cover crises like these. So, we want to say that like, no, now is not the time to be the generous member of the union. If you lost your job and you're picking between, food and rent, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but if people are like, I can only spare $1 this month and for the next 6 months, they still want you to join.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And with all the buildings that need to be organized, Burnaby, I imagine, is having issues. Richmond, all different parts about BC. Now may be the time for the launching of, maybe it's time for the network that VTU is spawning to New Westminster. It needs to, and I may bring this up at the VTU, it needs to, become multiple tenants unions or expand that structure, become a network somehow.
Yep.
Now's the time, because like we said, however this plays out, or when the pandemic ends, the crisis will not necessarily end. Will be phase 2. What's the world like afterwards? And we know that landlords are going to be, some of them are going to be looking for back pay with a vengeance. Someone is going to be making money off this in all ways. So to build up people power and tenant power, like that momentum has to pick up, both for now and for what comes later, because the people on top are not going to be stopping either.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need our own. We need our own organizations. We need to build our power, because they're not going to stop, even in the middle of a crisis, and especially after a crisis.
David, thank you so much for being here. Any last words, letting us know how to join the VTU, or any resources next campaign?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the platform and being able to kind of take the time to get into what we're doing. If you want to know more about the Vancouver Tenants Union, you can go to our website, which is vancouvertenantsunion.ca. And you can also just look at our campaign website, which is bcrentcrisis.ca. So those are the best things to go and check out right now, probably.
I just want to say, like, David, I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing, and for the work that VTU is doing. We've plugged you folks in our last video. We know a lot of people. Our last guest, Kiefer, spoke highly of the VTU as well. Knowing some of the information coming from Evan, seeing the work that the Vancouver Tenants Union is doing, I'm very heartened that folks like yourself and organizations like this, groups like this exist. And I think the best way to build that power is through the work that you're all doing. I'm also appreciative of the fact that there is a bit of an intersectional lens that VTU organizers are taking. Was that an agreement, Seven?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. I truly appreciate that, because it's easy for folks to fall through the cracks, right? And as long as we have good organizers, as long as we have good people on the ground, maybe not on the ground per se right now, stay home, stay safe, but we need you still. So follow the progress and the work that groups like Vancouver Tenants Union are doing, and see if you can be a part of them, see if you can lend a hand, see if you can make a difference, because the power is within you, and that power becomes amplified when you join voices like yourself. So this has been Power to People, and I hope that today you found some resources and information that will help you gather that power.